From sinister masterminds to notorious criminals, our top 10 list is guaranteed to send shivers down your spine. Hello and welcome. Today we're diving into the chilling depths of history as we explore the lives of some of the most unfamous and frankly downright evil individuals to have ever walked this earth. Let's get right into it. William Mansfield Jr., better known as Billy Mansfield, was an American serial killer, child molester, and sex offender who terrorized Florida and California in the late 1970s and early 1980s. His reign of terror left a trail of broken lives and shattered families. He rightfully earned his title as one of the most notorious criminals in the annals of American crime. Born in Grand Rapids, Michigan in 1956, Mansfield's life was marred from the start. His father, a convicted child molester himself. Mansfield was a school dropout, and he'd been involved in crime since his teenage days. In 1975, his descent into darkness reached a new level when he committed his first murder, strangling a young woman in Florida. The victim, a 15-year-old named Elaine Louise Ziegler, disappeared from a KOA campground in Brooksville, Florida during a family holiday. While authorities initially labeled her as a runaway, a witness contradicted this claim, reporting that the teenager had entered a light blue 1966 Ford Fairlane with Florida license plates, driven by a man in his 20s. Over the next 5 years, Mansfield's murderous rampage continued, leaving a trail of 4 more victims in its wake, getting away with each of them. In 1980, another tragic incident unfolded with the death of Renee Saling, a 29-year-old mother of 3 from California. Her lifeless, unclothed body was discovered in a drainage ditch near Watsonville, having fallen victim to strangulation and rape after meeting Mansfield at a local bar. In 1981, authorities apprehended Billy's brother, Gary Mansfield, a day earlier for selling methamphetamine to an undercover officer. During the search of Gary's residence, they discovered LSD, fentanyl, meth lab components, and other drug-related items. While investigating a nearby property, they came across suspicious items unrelated to the drug operation. As Gary was being arrested and placed into the police car, he vehemently demanded immunity, yelling about bodies scattered across the property. Combined with the unidentified suspicious items, this led investigators to obtain a fresh search warrant for the Mansfield premises. Upon arrival, they uncovered human remains within hours. In 2003, Mansfield pleaded guilty to the murders of the 4 women he had buried in his family's yard. He was sentenced to 4 additional life sentences. Next up, we have someone even more heinous. This evil individual used a broomstick as a murder weapon. Kenneth Allan McDuff was an American serial killer who earned the chilling moniker, the Broomstick Killer, for his brutal murder of a teenage girl using a broomstick. Like many other criminals, McDuff's childhood was marked by instability and dysfunction. His tumultuous home environment set the stage for McDuff's descent into darkness. In August 1966, McDuff committed his first murder. McDuff and his criminal friend, Green, abducted 3 teenagers, Edna Sullivan, Robert Brand, and Mark Dunham. They took them to a remote location and brutally murdered them. Sullivan was raped and strangled with a broomstick. The following day, Green couldn't live with the guilt, so he turned himself in. Green was given a lesser sentence because he confessed and testified against McDuff. McDuff went to trial and was sentenced to death for the murder of Robert Brand. However, due to the suspension of capital punishment in 1972 and the overcrowding in Texas prisons, the inmates were not completing their entire sentences. Consequently, McDuff was granted parole in October 1989 after serving 23 years in prison. However, despite 23 years in prison, McDuff didn't come out as a new man. Just after 3 days, he began a second killing spree, targeting young women and girls again. In 1992, McDuff was arrested for the murder of 18-year-old Colleen Reed based on circumstantial evidence and eyewitness accounts. However, he later confessed to the crime. He was also linked to the murders of 6 other people. In 1993, McDuff was once again sentenced to death. This time, the sentence would not be overturned. On November 17, 1998, Kenneth McDuff was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. Kenneth's life was a twisted tale of violence, manipulation, and a complete disregard for human life. But if you think murders can't get worse, you're in for a shock with the next case. Joshua Borin was a 34-year-old U.S. police officer. He served 3 months with the Linden Police Department. He had previously worked as a Utah County Sheriff's deputy for 7 years. this police officer committed a crime no one expected, although he wouldn't live to face its consequences. On the 16th of January 2014, Borin took the lives of his British wife, 2 children, and mother-in-law before turning the gun on himself. The tragedy unfolded after his wife discovered she had been repeatedly drugged and assaulted by him. Investigations revealed that Borin had recorded the assaults. His wife found out about these tapes in 2013. Despite being separated, she confronted him about the assaults the night before the tragic incident. As a lawman, this tragedy seemed surreal. He took an oath to serve and protect, and of all people, his family should have been the ones who felt the safest. Next on our list is Clifford Olson Jr. Clifford Robert Olson Jr. was born on January 1, 1940. He was a Canadian serial killer who murdered 11 children and teenagers between 1980 and 1981. His crimes shocked the nation and left a dark stain on the province of British Columbia. Due to an unstable home, he was already involved in serious offenses as a teenager, including burglary and car theft. In the 1960s, Olson's criminal career took a sinister turn when he began targeting young girls. During this period, he was convicted of several sexual assaults, but somehow, he always managed to get out of prison early on parole. In 1980, Olson was released from prison for the final time. This is when his crimes started to get deadly. He began picking up young hitchhikers and taking them to secluded areas, where he would rape and murder them. Olson's criminal lifestyle wouldn't last forever. In August 1981, he picked up 2 hitchhikers who were undercover police officers. He was arrested and charged with attempted kidnapping. In January 1982, Olson pleaded guilty to 11 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 11 concurrent life sentences. The mind-boggling thing about this man was that he never expressed remorse for his crimes. He died in prison on September 30, 2011 at the age of 71. Clifford Olson Jr. was a monster who preyed on innocent members of society, but he wasn't the only one. Muhammad Adam Omar Ishaq, also known as the Sana'a Ripper, was a Sudanese murderer and alleged serial killer who gained notoriety for the brutal killings of female medical students at the Sana'a University in Yemen. Working as a morgue assistant, Omar leveraged his access to the university morgue to lure and murder his victims. In May 1999, the bodies of 21 female students were discovered buried on the university campus, and some were found in the dark tunnels of the sewage system. The gruesome nature of the killings shocked the community and raised concerns about a serial killer operating within the university. Omar's involvement came to light on May 17, 2000, after continuous complaints from the mother of an Iraqi student who had vanished mysteriously in December 1999. He was arrested on suspicion of killing 16 of the 21 victims, including the Iraqi student. Upon his arrest, Omar attempted suicide by cutting his wrist with his spectacles, but was unsuccessful. Just a day after his arrest, Omar made a shocking confession, admitting to raping, killing, and mutilating 5 women. He claimed that he was unable to resist the beauty of his victims, and that he killed them to send them to heaven. He claimed to have killed 49 additional victims across several countries in the Arab world. Omar was convicted of the murders of 2 medical students and sentenced to death. He was executed in June 2001 in Sana'a, Yemen. And if you think Omar is the only reminder of the dark side of human nature, then you haven't seen this next case. This man is little, but his crimes are huge. Samuel Little, an American serial killer, stands as one of the most haunting figures in American criminal history, confessing the murders of 93 women between 1970 and 2005. He holds the dubious distinction of being the most prolific serial killer in the United States. This man was not just a killer, he was very creative. His victims were often strangled and left in desolate areas. However, his victims' deaths were often misclassified as overdoses or accidents. How did he pull that off? Born Samuel McDowell on June 7, 1940, in Reynolds, Georgia, his mother, a teenage prostitute, abandoned him soon after his birth, and he had to move in with his grandmother. His criminal life started at a very young age. He would lure his victims into his vehicle, strangle them, and then dump their bodies in remote locations. Many of these women were unidentified. In 2011, Little was arrested for the murder of Audrey Everett, a 40-year-old woman found strangled in a Pascagoula, Mississippi motel room. While awaiting trial, he began confessing to other murders, providing details that only the killer would know. He claimed to have killed 93 women, and at least 50 of them were confirmed. This made Little the most prolific serial killer in American history, surpassing Ted Bundy and the Green River Killer Gary Ridgway. In 2018, Little was convicted of 3 of the murders in Los Angeles County and sentenced to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. He died in prison on December 30th, 2020 at the age of 80. And that's the end of Little, maybe not such a little man. But this next man is even more cruel. He removed his victim's eyeballs. Charles Frederick Albright, also known as the Eyeball Killer, was an American murderer and suspected serial killer who terrorized the Dallas-Fort Worth area in the late 1980s and early 1990s. In the late 1980s, Albright began targeting prostitutes in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He would pick them up in his truck and drive them to secluded areas, where he would strangle them and remove their eyeballs. He was given the nickname the Eyeball Killer because of his gruesome signature. Albright's first suspected victim was Rhonda Bowie, a 20-year-old prostitute who was found strangled in a Dallas alley in October 1988. However, Albright was never charged with her murder. In December 1990, Albright's second suspected victim, Mary Pratt, a 33-year-old prostitute, was found strangled and mutilated in a vacant lot in Oak Cliff, Dallas. Her eyeballs had been removed. A few months later, in March 1991, Shirley Williams, a 46-year-old prostitute, was found strangled in a ditch in Garland, Texas. Her eyeballs had also been removed. Police began connecting these crimes to him and began looking for him based on circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial or indirect evidence requires interpretation to draw conclusions. For instance, fingerprints found at a crime scene. Albright was arrested in March 1991. Albright was charged with the murder of Shirley Williams. His trial began December 1991. The jury found Albright guilty of murder and he was sentenced to life in prison. He died in prison on August 22, 2020 at the age of 87. Albright was a violent and disturbed man who preyed on some of the most vulnerable members of society. And what did he do with the eyeballs? We've discussed several evil men thus far, but now we have a pair of women who fit the bill. Olga Rutterschmidt and Helen Golay, 2 seemingly harmless elderly women, shocked the world with their cold-blooded crimes. Dubbed the Black Widow Killers, they targeted homeless men in California. Olga and Helen crossed paths in the 1990s, and a sinister partnership was formed. Their modus operandi was calculated and deceptive. They would approach homeless men, often veterans or struggling with addiction, offering them a place to stay, food, and even financial assistance. Gaining their trust, they would then convince the men to take out life insurance policies, naming them as beneficiaries. In 1999, their first victim, Paul Vados, was found dead in a hit-and-run accident. Authorities ruled it an unfortunate incident, unaware that it was a deliberate act orchestrated by the duo. 6 years later, in 2005, their second victim, Kenneth McDavid, met a similar fate. Suspicions arose when investigators discovered the excessive number of life insurance policies Golay and Rutterschmidt had taken out on the men, totaling over $5 million. Further investigation revealed inconsistencies in their accounts of the accidents, leading to their arrest in 2006. The jury found Golay and Rutterschmidt guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder for the deaths of Vados and McDavid. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lawrence Dalton was born on April 12, 1945. He'd been involved in a series of violent offenses against females during the 1970s. He had a wife and an open relationship with 2 other women. Varying accounts suggested that some of these women were involved in Dalton's criminal activities, either willingly or against their will. Dalton was like a lord. He had many sex workers, and when a woman wouldn't go along with his plans, he resorted to murder to ensure that they would not go to the police. But it was a 14-year-old girl who finally escaped and put the police on Dalton, his wife, and his girlfriends. On April 23, 1979, law enforcement officials began searching for the 34-year-old. Turned out he was wanted on murder charges after the body of a woman was found near Kenosha, Wisconsin, since he'd been reported by the 14-year-old. The victim was identified as Blanche Penna, who had been missing from Racine, Wisconsin. Dalton was also suspected in the murder of 12-year-old Lisa Slusser, who was slain in Waukegan, Illinois in 1977. Dalton had previously been charged with rape, deviant sexual assault, and taking indecent liberties with a child in an incident in Brooklyn, New York. Dalton was arrested in Cleveland on April 23rd and held for questioning on 2 counts of murder. Authorities were also investigating the death of a Jane Doe victim found in Lake County, Illinois in the summer of 1978. Dalton was formally charged with the Penna murder on the day of his arrest and waived extradition to Waukegan, where authorities believed he was responsible for 4 homicides. And now, the otaku killer, who had an obsession for very young girls. Suomu Miyazaki was a Japanese serial killer who murdered 4 girls in Tokyo and Saitama Prefecture between August 1988 and June 1989. Miyazaki was born August 21, 1962, in Itsukaishi, Tokyo, and was the son of a wealthy family, unlike the other criminals we've discussed. Miyazaki was a quiet and withdrawn child who was often bullied by his peers. He was also obsessed with manga and anime, which is why he was nicknamed Otaku. Miyazaki's crimes began in August 1988, when he abducted and killed 4-year-old Mari Kono. He then went on to kill 3 more girls in the following year. All of his victims were young girls who were abducted from public places. He would take them to his car, where he would strangle them and sexually assault them. He would then dismember their bodies and dispose of the parts in different locations. He also engaged in cannibalism, preserved body parts as trophies, and taunted the families of his victims. Miyazaki was arrested in July 1989 after being confronted while taking nude photographs of a young girl. He was found to have a large collection of manga and anime, as well as several photographs of young girls. Miyazaki was convicted of 4 counts of murder and sentenced to death in 1997. He was executed by hanging on June 17, 2008. If you find these stories interesting, do like and subscribe to this channel. Come back for more.